The first rule of the gilded cage is to never let them see you acknowledge the bars. For 7 years Elara Vance had been a master of this particular art. The crystal chandeliers of my father-in-law's mansion didn't just illuminate, they scrutinized. The polished mahogany of the 20-seater dining table didn't just host meals. It reflected the carefully constructed facades of everyone seated around it. Tonight, the air was thick with the usual cocktail of old money, subtle power plays, and the cloying scent of my mother-in-law's prized Casablanca lilies. I sat to the right of my husband, Julian Thorne. His hand, cool and smooth, briefly covered mine on the tablecloth, a gesture meant for the audience, a pantomime of affection. I didn't flinch. I had perfected the art of the serene, wifely smile, a mask forged in the fires of quiet desperation and polished by societal expectation. The new merger with the Chin Group is finalizing beautifully, Julian was saying to my father, Alistair Vance, who sat at the foot of the table, opposite his business partner, Lawrence Thorne. My father's face, a roadmap of a lifetime of boardroom battles, was impassive, but I saw the slight gleam in his eyes. The Vance-Thorne partnership was the bedrock of both our families' empires. My marriage to Julian had been the human seal on that corporate treaty. Excellent work, Julian, Lawrence boomed, his voice filling the cavernous dining room. He was a man who believed volume equated to authority. Alistair, our boys have outdone themselves. Our boys. The phrase was a deliberate needle. My father had no son, only me. I was the sole heir to the Vance fortune, a fact that had always hung over this union. Julian was the brilliant, ambitious son Lawrence could parade, while I was the vessel through which the Vance legacy would, presumably, be absorbed into the Thorne dynasty. I took a sip of ice-cold water, the condensation beating on the crystal like cold sweat. My gaze drifted around the table. My mother, Eleanor, was engaged in a hushed, animated conversation with Lawrence's wife, Beatrice, about the upcoming charity gala season. Theirs was a world of curated guest lists and floral arrangements, a safe, glittering distraction. Julian's younger sister, Chloe, was scrolling discreetly on her phone under the table, a minor rebellion I envied. Everything was as it always was. A perfectly staged play. But then the air shifted. It wasn't a sound but a change in pressure. Julian's phone, which had been buzzing with an irritating persistence all through the main course, finally went silent. He excused himself, his chair scraping back too loudly. "Everything all right, son?" Lawrence asked, a flicker of concern in his small, shrewd eyes. "Just a minor client crisis," Julian said with a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. He looked at me and for a fleeting second I saw something there, not guilt but a strange, unsettling excitement. "Actually, I've invited a guest. I hope you don't mind." She was in the neighborhood, and it seemed impolite not to ask her to join us for dessert. A guest. At a family dinner. The unspoken rules of this gathering were as rigid as the placement of the silverware. This was unprecedented. Beatrice's smile was brittle. "A business associate, darling? At a family dinner." "In a manner of speaking," Julian said cryptically, his eyes darting towards the grand entrance hall. The doors swung open and the butler announced, "A Miss Isabelle Lauron." She was young. Painfully so. Maybe 25, with a cascade of honey-blonde hair and wide, innocent blue eyes. She was beautiful in a soft, unthreatening way, dressed in a simple but expensive-looking silk sheath dress. But it wasn't her youth or her beauty that stole the air from the room. It was the very pronounced, perfectly rounded swell of her stomach. She was heavily, undeniably pregnant. The silence was absolute, broken only by the faint clink of a fork as Chloe dropped hers onto her plate. Julian moved to her side, his entire demeanor shifting. The casual arrogance he wore like a second skin melted away, replaced by a protective, almost reverent tenderness. He placed a hand on the small of her back, his other hand coming to rest possessively on her belly. "Everyone," he said, his voice dripping with pride, "this is Isabelle. And this," he paused, letting his gaze sweep over the stunned faces of his family before finally landing on me, "is the mother of my son. Your future grandson and heir." The world didn't slow down. It didn't shatter into a million pieces. Instead, it sharpened into a hyper-real, excruciating focus. I saw the dust motes dancing in the chandelier's light. I saw the way the scarlet of the Bordeaux in Lawrence's glass matched the sudden flush on his neck. I saw my mother's hand fly to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. I saw the triumphant, gloating little smile on Isabel's face, directed solely at me. And I saw Julian. My husband of 7 years. The man I had shared a home, a bed and a life with. He was looking at me not with apology, not with shame, but with a chilling, victorious defiance. This was his masterstroke. He had not only cheated, he had flaunted it. He had brought his pregnant mistress to the inner sanctum of our family, a deliberate, brutal power play designed to humiliate me and solidify his claim. He was forcing everyone to choose, betting that the promise of a male heir would outweigh any loyalty to me. I felt the eyes of the entire table swing to me. They were waiting for the explosion. For the tears. For the hysterics they could later dismiss as female emotion. Beatrice was already preparing her condescending, placating tone. Lawrence was calculating the financial fallout. Chloe looked like she was watching a car crash in slow motion. I looked at the woman carrying my husband's child. I looked at my husband, his face a mask of smug certainty. And then I did the one thing none of them expected. I didn't break. I slowly, deliberately placed my linen napkin on the table. I turned my head not towards Julian, not towards his weeping, simpering mistress, but towards my father. Our eyes met across the vast, polished expanse of the table. In his gaze I didn't see pity. I saw a reflection of my own cold, calculating fury. I saw the same steely resolve that had built an empire from nothing. The room was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat, a steady, powerful drum in my ears. I looked at my dad and said, my voice clear, calm and cutting through the tension like a shard of ice, "The partnership ends today." A collective, sharp intake of breath echoed around the table. Lawrence Thorne half rose from his chair, sputtering. "Alara, you can't be serious. This is a private matter, we can." My father didn't look at him. His eyes remained locked with mine. He gave a single, sharp, definitive nod. He agreed. I said, the words not for him but a simple, stark announcement to the room. The shock on the Thorns' faces was a palpable thing. Julian's smugness evaporated, replaced by a dawning, sickening comprehension. He had expected to break me. He had not expected me to break the world he so desperately wanted to inherit. I pushed my chair back, the sound unnaturally loud in the stunned silence. I didn't look at Isabel. I didn't look at Julian. I walked out of the dining room, my head high, my back straight, leaving the ruins of my gilded cage and the first act of my revenge behind me. I hadn't waited for Julian to come home. There was no point. The charade was over. I'd packed only the essentials, documents, heirlooms from my mother, a few pieces of jewelry that were truly mine, and clothes that spoke of power, not placation. The designer gowns and delicate blouses that had been my armor in his world were left hanging in the walk-in closet, like the shed skin of a creature I no longer was. My phone had been buzzing incessantly. Julian. Then Lawrence. Then Beatrice, her messages shifting from faux concern to thinly veiled panic. I blocked them all. There was only one call I took. "The jet is fueled and waiting at Teterboro." My father's voice was crisp and efficient over the line. "The apartment at the Pierre is ready for you. I've also had a team sweep it and your new office for any unwanted surveillance." "Office?" I asked, a flicker of surprise cutting through my icy resolve. "You didn't think you were going to wage this war from a hotel room, did you?" he replied, a hint of dry amusement in his tone. "Suite 3400 Vance Holdings headquarters. Yours. Your security clearance and executive access were activated an hour ago." A thrill, sharp and electric, shot through me. Suite 3400. The corner office on the executive floor, one that had been vacant for years. It had a better view than the CEO's office. My father was not just backing me, he was anointing me. "Thank you, Dad." "Don't thank me yet," he said. "The board meeting is scheduled for 10 a.m. tomorrow. Lawrence and Julian will be there. They're going to try and control the narrative. We need to be ready." "I'll be ready." I ended the call and took one last look around the penthouse. My eyes fell on a framed photograph on the mantelpiece. It was from our wedding day. Julian looked dashing, triumphant. I looked young, hopeful, deceived. I picked it up, the cool glass smooth under my fingertips. I didn't smash it. I simply opened the back, slid the photograph out and tore it neatly in half, dropping Julian's smiling face into the cold, empty fireplace. I left my half on the mantel. Final silent statement. The car ride to the hotel was a blur of city lights. The Pierre was an institution of old-world elegance, a stark contrast to Julian's sterile modern penthouse. The suite was breathtaking, all silk wall coverings and antique furniture, with a panoramic view of Central Park. A vase of fresh white orchids sat on the console table, my mother's doing no doubt. A gesture of silent support from a woman who had always lived in the shadow of powerful men, but who had, I now realized, passed her own quiet strength to her daughter. I didn't sleep. I sat at the Louis XV desk, my laptop open, its screen illuminating the dark room. I pulled up every financial report, every SEC filing, every analyst review of the Thorn-held assets within the partnership. I cross-referenced them with the internal memos and offhand comments Julian had let slip over the years. My father is so stubborn. He's refusing to divest from the Singapore container port, even though it's been a money pit for 3 years. The commercial real estate portfolio is a nightmare. We're overexposed in markets that are about to correct. If we could just get the liquidity from the VC arm to shore up our shipping division, we'd be golden. But your father guards that fund like a dragon. Each memory was a piece of the puzzle. Julian had seen me as a sounding board, a compliant ear. He never imagined I was a vault, storing his every insecurity and strategic weakness. By 5 a.m. I had a detailed multi-phase plan drafted. Phase 1, liquidity squeeze. I identified 3 Thorn subsidiaries that were particularly vulnerable due to their debt structures. A coordinated attack on their public stock, combined with calling in certain intercompany loans from the Vance side, would trigger a cascade of margin calls and force them to sell assets at a loss. Phase 2, client poaching. I compiled a list of their top 20 most profitable clients in their logistics and real estate arms. I drafted a proposal for our competing divisions to offer them irresistible loss-leading contracts for the first year. It would be expensive for us in the short term, but catastrophic for the Thorns, destroying their revenue stream and investor confidence. Phase 3, the kill. Once their value was sufficiently depressed and they were desperate for a cash infusion, we would make a lowball buyout offer for their entire stake in the partnership. An offer they would be forced to accept to avoid total bankruptcy. I attached the document to an encrypted email and sent it to my father. The subject line was simple: Operation Regicide. His response came 10 minutes later. Approved. Mobilize at will. See you at the board meeting. I leaned back in the chair, the first rays of dawn painting the city skyline in hues of rose and gold. I felt no fatigue. I felt alive. For the first time in years, I was not Alara Thorn, the decorative wife. I was Alara Vance, heir to an empire and architect of a downfall. I dressed with deliberate care. A tailored, sharp-shouldered Alexander McQueen trouser suit in charcoal gray. Simple white shell. My mother's pearl earrings, a classic symbol that now felt like a warrior's talisman. I pulled my hair back into a severe low chignon and applied a slash of crimson lipstick, the only color in my monochrome ensemble. I looked in the mirror and saw a CEO. I saw my father's daughter. The car pulled up to the sleek, black monolith that was Vance Holdings' headquarters. The lobby was a cathedral of commerce, all echoing marble and silent efficiency. Employees scurried, their eyes widening slightly as they saw me stride past, my heels clicking a staccato rhythm of intent on the polished floor. The whispers started immediately. I ignored them. The elevator to the executive floor was silent and swift. The doors opened directly into the plush reception area for the boardroom. I could hear the raised voices from inside even before the assistant could announce me. Unprecedented and irresponsible. Lawrence Thorn was bellowing. To threaten the partnership over a personal matter. We need to table this discussion and focus on the Chin merger. I pushed the double doors open and walked in. Every head turned. The board of directors, a mix of Vance loyalists, Thorn allies and neutral parties, sat around the massive teak table. Lawrence was standing, his face puce with anger. Julian sat beside him, pale and tense, his eyes bloodshot. He looked like he hadn't slept. Good. My father sat at the head of the table, perfectly calm. The seat to his right, always reserved for Julian, was empty. The seat to his left was occupied by the CFO. My father gestured to the empty chair. Alara, he said, his voice cutting through the tension. Thank you for joining us. We were just discussing the stability of the partnership. I didn't sit in the proffered chair. I walked to the head of the table and stood beside my father, placing my tablet down in front of me. The discussion is over, Lawrence, I said, my voice cool and projecting to every corner of the room. The Vance Thorne partnership as it was is terminated. The only item on the agenda today is how we proceed with the dissolution and the valuation of the Thorne family's minority stake. The room erupted. Julian shot to his feet. You can't do this. This is my company too. I've bled for this partnership. I turned my gaze on him for the first time. I let him see the absolute absence of emotion in my eyes. No hate, no hurt, just a cold, analytical assessment. You bled for your own ambition, Julian, I said, my tone devoid of inflection. And as of yesterday you made it clear where your true loyalties and your future heir lie. This is no longer your company. It's a matter of determining what, if anything, your family's stake is still worth. I tapped my tablet and the screen behind me lit up with the first slide of my presentation. It was a simple, stark title. Vance Holdings, A Path Forward. Subtitle: Strategic Divestiture of Non-Core Assets. The Thorne family's faces were a study in shock and dawning horror. Their fall was beginning, and it was being orchestrated from the boardroom they had fought so hard to dominate. My ultimate revenge was no longer a fantasy. It was a corporate strategy, and it was now in motion. The boardroom felt like a cage with the bars suddenly electrified. The air, once thick with the cloying scent of privilege and power, was now charged with pure, undiluted panic. I stood at the head of the table, my father a silent, formidable pillar of support beside me, and watched the Thorne empire begin to crack at its foundations. This is corporate sabotage. Lawrence Thorne spluttered, his finger jabbing towards the screen where the words strategic divestiture of non-core assets glowed with menacing simplicity. You can't unilaterally decide to sell off our divisions. They are not your divisions, Lawrence, my father said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. They are assets of the Vance Thorne partnership, of which I am the majority shareholder and CEO. And my daughter, as a major shareholder in her own right and the newly appointed head of special projects, has just outlined a compelling strategic rationale for their divestiture. Head of Special Projects. The title was a masterpiece of corporate theater bestowed upon me in that instant. It gave me the authority to execute the plan I'd drafted in the dark hours of the morning. The neutral board members looked intrigued. The Vance loyalists were barely suppressing smiles. Julian found his voice, though it was strained, stripped of its usual arrogant timbre. This rationale is revenge, plain and simple. You're destroying billions in shareholder value because your feelings are hurt. I turned my gaze to him, a slow, deliberate movement. I allowed a small, cold smile to touch my lips. Shareholder value is my only concern, Julian. Which is why I'm proposing we shed these underperforming, highly leveraged assets before they drag the entire partnership into insolvency. I clicked to the next slide. It showed the debt-to-equity ratio of Thorne Maritime Logistics. The numbers were a sickly red. For instance, Thorne Maritime. Debt covenants are a house of cards. A single-point downturn in global shipping rates, which as you know is highly likely given the current economic indicators, would trigger a cross-default clause that would wipe out its entire equity value. I hadn't learned this from reports alone. Julian had drunkenly lamented this very vulnerability after a difficult meeting with their bankers 6 months ago. He'd called his father a dinosaur for not seeing it. I had poured him another scotch and filed the information away. The head of the audit committee, a stern woman named Margaret Wright, leaned forward, her glasses perched on the end of her nose. These figures are alarming. Why wasn't the full board made aware of the severity of the leverage in this subsidiary? Lawrence glared at Julian. My son was overseeing a restructuring plan. A plan that seems to have involved hoping for a market miracle, I interjected smoothly. Meanwhile, the interest payments are cannibalizing the profits from our more innovative divisions. It's a drain. A strategic liability. I clicked again. The next slide detailed the commercial real estate portfolio. Then we have the Pullstone Properties Fund. Overexposed to secondary Asian markets, with vacancy rates climbing. We're carrying these assets at valuations that are optimistic to say the least. A proper mark-to-market would reveal a hole large enough to sink a lesser company. I was using their own secrets, their own failures as my weapons. Each slide was a bullet and I was aiming with sniper-like precision. I wasn't emotional. I was factual. I was ruthless. I was everything they had pretended Julian was. For 2 hours, I systematically dismantled their legacy in front of the people whose respect they craved most. I presented charts, projections, risk analyses. I spoke the language of power they understood perfectly, and I was fluent in a way they had never anticipated. I was no longer the silent wife. I was the oracle of their doom. The board voted. It wasn't even close. My father's shares, combined with mine and the swayed neutral parties, gave us a supermajority. The motion to begin the immediate strategic review and divestiture of the designated Thorn-held assets passed. Lawrence looked like he'd been physically struck. Julian was ashen, staring at the table as if he could find an escape route in the wood grain. "This meeting is adjourned," my father announced. As the board members filed out, casting furtive, shocked glances at the Thorns, I gathered my tablet. Julian suddenly lunged forward, grabbing my arm. His grip was tight, desperate. "Elara, stop this," he hissed, his voice low and frantic. "You've made your point. You've humiliated me. Now stop before you destroy everything." I looked down at his hand on my arm, then back up at his face. I didn't pull away. I just looked at him with such utter contempt that he flinched and released me. "You brought your pregnant mistress to a family dinner, Julian," I said, my voice barely a whisper, but it carried in the now empty room. "You didn't want to humiliate me. You wanted to annihilate me. You wanted to show me, my father, everyone, that I was obsolete. Replaceable." I leaned in slightly. "But you miscalculated. You didn't break the docile wife. You woke the heir. And this isn't humiliation. This is just the first domino." I turned and walked out, leaving him standing there in the ruins of his birthright. Phase 1 had begun. The rest of the day was a whirlwind. From the boardroom I went directly to my new office on the 34th floor. It was even more stunning than I'd imagined, with panoramic views that dwarfed the one from the penthouse. A team of analysts personally vetted by my father was already waiting for me. We worked with frenetic energy. Calls were made to friendly hedge funds, outlining the short-selling strategy against Thorn Maritime and Pullstone properties. Legal drafted the notices to call in the intercompany loans. The sales teams in our logistics and property management divisions were briefed and unleashed with their targeted, predatory offers to the Thorn clients. By the close of the markets, the first domino had teetered and fallen. Thorn Maritime stock was down 18% on massive, mysterious volume. The financial news channels were buzzing with speculation. "Is the mighty Vance Thorn partnership showing cracks?" one anchor asked. I sat in my office, the city lights twinkling below, and allowed myself a single satisfied smile. It was a small fall, just a stumble. But it was a precursor. The world was now watching. The Thorns were bleeding and the sharks were starting to circle. My phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "I know what you're doing. We need to talk. Isabel." I stared at the message. The mistress. Reaching out. A curious development. Was she scared? Was she looking for a payout? Or was she, perhaps, another piece to be moved on the chessboard? I didn't reply. I simply deleted the message. Let them sweat. Let them panic. The game was afoot and I held all the cards. The text from Isabel lingered in the back of my mind like a faint, discordant note in the otherwise precise symphony of destruction I was conducting. I didn't have the mental bandwidth to deal with a frightened, pregnant mistress. She was a symptom of Julian's betrayal, not a cause, and therefore irrelevant to my strategic objectives. Or so I thought. 2 days after the board meeting, as the financial press began to dissect the troubling signals emanating from the Thorn divisions, my assistant buzzed me. "Ms. Vance? There's a Ms. Laurent here to see you. She says it's urgent." I was in the middle of a video conference with the heads of our venture capital arm, directing them to freeze all further capital allocations to any Thorn-affiliated startups. I paused, my finger hovering over the mute button. "Isabel." "Here." The audacity was staggering. "Tell her I'm in meetings all day," I said, my tone crisp. "I did, ma'am." He's rather insistent. "And she's crying." Crying. Of course. The reality of her situation was likely beginning to dawn on her. The wealthy, powerful married man she'd entangled herself with was seeing his empire crumble. The golden future she'd been promised was turning to rust before her eyes. A part of me, the part that had been brutally humiliated, felt a savage thrill. But the larger strategic part of me was curious. What could she possibly hope to gain from this? Fine, I said. Give me 5 minutes. Then send her in. And ensure there's a witness present. Have David from legal sit in the corner and take notes. Right away, Ms. Vance. I ended my video call and straightened the papers on my desk. I didn't need to fortify myself. The McQueen suit and the corner office were armor enough. When the door opened, Isabel looked nothing like the triumphant, glowing girl from the dinner. Her face was pale and puffy, her eyes red-rimmed. She was dressed in expensive-looking maternity jeans and a simple sweater, but she looked young, lost, and terribly vulnerable. She clutched a small handbag like a lifeline. David, a senior corporate lawyer with a face like granite, followed her in and took a seat in an armchair in the corner, a legal pad on his knee. Isabel, I said, not inviting her to sit. To what do I owe this disruption? She flinched at my tone. Miss Vance. I'm sorry to just show up like this. I'm sure you are. Get to the point. My time is valuable. Tears welled in her eyes again. It's Julian. He's not who I thought he was. I couldn't help it. A short, humorless laugh escaped my lips. You don't say. Did you discover that before or after he got you pregnant while married to another woman? She flushed a deep, mortified red. I know you must hate me. Hate requires a level of emotional engagement I no longer possess where you or Julian are concerned, I said, my voice flat. This is business. You are a personal complication that has become a business liability. Now why are you here? She took a shaky breath, visibly trying to pull herself together. He's lying to me. He told me you were cold, that your marriage was a business arrangement, that you had an understanding. He said you would be compensated. That this was the way things were done in your world. And you believed that? I asked, a flicker of genuine curiosity cutting through my disdain. You believed a man who would cheat on his wife would be truthful with his mistress? She looked down at her hands, twisting the strap of her purse. I was naive. I was flattered. He's powerful, charming. He made me feel special. But since the dinner, since you left, he's changed. He's angry all the time. He's talking about you like you're a monster. He says you're trying to destroy him. He's correct, I said simply. She looked up, startled by my bluntness. He told me not to worry. He said his family was too powerful, that you'd come crawling back once you calmed down. But then the stock started falling. He's not returning my calls as much. Last night he told me I might have to adjust my expectations. For the baby's sake. But there was the money, the security. The promise was evaporating and the mother-to-be was getting scared. Your poor financial planning is not my concern, I said, turning slightly to look at the cityscape. If you're looking for a settlement, you'll need to take that up with Julian and his lawyers. I'm sure he'll be very generous, once he has any generosity left to give. It's not just that, she blurted out, her voice cracking. He has a temper. I'd never seen it before, but now, he slammed his fist on the counter last night when I asked him about a trust fund for the baby. He said I was becoming a nag just like you. The words were meant to wound, but they had the opposite effect. They illuminated a path. Julian's mask was slipping not just with me but with her. The charming prince was revealing the petulant, entitled man beneath. An angry, desperate man is a careless man. I turned back to her, my expression unchanging. That sounds distressing. But again, not my problem. You made your bed. She started crying in earnest now, quiet, hopeless sobs. I have nothing. My family, they don't have money. I quit my job when Julian asked me to. I have nowhere to go. I let her cry for a moment, the sound a stark contrast to the silent, powerful hum of the city outside. David scribbled a note, his face impassive. I was about to have her escorted out when she looked up, her eyes desperate. He keeps a second phone, she whispered. A black one. He never lets it out of his sight. The night of the dinner he was texting on it constantly. I saw a name pop up once. Kate Asano. He got very angry and snatched it away. I went very still. Kate Asano. Kenji Asano. He was the CEO of a Japanese conglomerate, a rival bidder we had beaten out for the Chin merger. Julian had been our lead negotiator. He had access to all our strategic pricing and our walkaway numbers. A cold, terrifying suspicion began to form in my mind. What if Julian's betrayal was even deeper than a mistress and a love child? What if he had been playing for the other team professionally as well? Feeding information to a competitor would be a felony. It would be more than just a marital betrayal. It would be the ultimate corporate treason. I looked at Isabel, this weeping, naive girl, and saw her not as a victim or a villain, but as a potential asset. An unexpected pawn that had just wandered onto my chessboard. I gestured to the chair opposite my desk. "Sit down, Isabel." She looked surprised but complied, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "David, could you give us a moment?" I asked. He nodded, understanding, and left without a word. I leaned forward, my elbows on the desk, my fingers steepled. "You feel trapped. You feel used. You're scared for your future and the future of your child. Is that correct?" She nodded, her eyes wide. "I can't offer you sympathy. But I can offer you a proposition," I said, my voice low and deliberate. "You want security? I can provide that. A new identity, a comfortable life, a guaranteed trust fund for your child, completely insulated from the coming storm that will engulf Julian Thorne." Her breath hitched. "How? Why would you do that?" "In exchange for information," I said. "You are, for the moment, still in his orbit. He may let things slip. He may become careless with that second phone. I want to know everything. Every name, every worried comment, every secret meeting. You will be my eyes and ears." It was a cruel offer. I was asking a pregnant woman to spy on the father of her child. But war was cruel. And she had chosen to be a soldier in Julian's army the moment she walked into that dining room. She stared at me, conflict warring on her face. Fear, guilt, and a desperate, clawing need for self-preservation. "He lied to me," she said again, her voice hardening slightly. "He's using me just like he used you." "Yes," I agreed. "The question is, what are you going to do about it?" She was silent for a long time, her hand resting on her swollen belly. She was weighing her shattered illusions against the survival of her child. It was no contest. She looked up, and the helplessness in her eyes was gone, replaced by a grim resolve. "What do you need to know?" I smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. The intelligence from Isabel was the missing piece. It was the high-grade explosive that could blow the entire Thorn Fortress to smithereens. But a bomb was only useful if detonated at the perfect moment for maximum impact. For now, I sat on the information, letting the more conventional financial pressures continue to tighten the noose. The short-selling campaign against Thorn Maritime and Pullstone Properties was having a devastating ripple effect. Margins were called. The Thorns were forced to liquidate other, healthier assets at fire sale prices to cover the losses, which in turn spooked their remaining investors and drove their stock prices down further. It was a death spiral. Our client poaching operation was equally successful. We lost money on the initial contracts just as I'd projected, but the strategic payoff was immense. 3 of Thorn Logistics' biggest clients defected to us in a single week, issuing press releases praising Vance Holdings' innovative and competitive new partnership models. The public vote of no confidence was a wound that bled credibility. I watched it all from my command center on the 34th floor, a general surveying a battlefield where my enemy was in full, chaotic retreat. My father handled the public face, appearing on financial networks to calmly reassure the market about the strategic repositioning of the company, emphasizing strength, stability, and a focus on future-proof technologies. The contrast between his steady hand and the Thorns' visible panic could not have been more stark. A week after Isabel's visit, my private line buzzed. It was Julian. I almost didn't answer. But curiosity and a certain cold satisfaction won out. "Ilara." His voice was ragged, stripped of all its former polish. He sounded like a man who hadn't slept in days. "We need to talk. Please." "I believe we've said all there is to say, Julian." "No, we haven't," he snapped, the desperation cracking through. "You're systematically destroying my family's life's work. This has gone far enough." "It's gone exactly as far as you pushed it," I replied, my tone conversational. "You declared war in that dining room. I'm just better at it than you are." There was a long silence on the other end, filled only by his ragged breathing. "Is this about the baby? Is that it?" "Well, I'll make provisions. I'll ensure he's provided for, but separately. He won't touch your inheritance." I almost laughed. He still thought this was about money and legacy in the personal dynastic sense. He couldn't comprehend that for me it had transcended that. This was about principle. About justice. This stopped being about the baby the moment you tried to use him as a weapon against me, I said. This is about the fact that you are and always have been unworthy of the trust my family placed in you. You're a leaky vessel, Julian. You always have been. What is that supposed to mean? He hissed. It means you can't hold water. You boast, you preen, you take credit for the work of others, but when pressure is applied, you crack. You look for shortcuts. You look for someone else to blame. I let the implication hang in the air. I didn't mention Asano. Not yet. That card was to be played with much greater fanfare. Meet with me, he pleaded, a new tactic. Just once. Face to face. There's a gala at the museum tomorrow night for the new contemporary wing. The one we sponsored. Come with me. Let the world see we're civil. It will calm the markets. It will give us a chance to talk privately to find a way out of this mess. The audacity was breathtaking. He wanted me to play the reconciled wife in public, to throw him a lifeline so he could have a chance to maneuver against me in private. He thought I was still the woman who would prioritize appearances over survival. And then I thought about it. The gala. The entire world would be watching. The financial press, the socialites, our rivals, our allies. It was the perfect stage. All right, I said after a deliberately long pause, letting him sweat. I'll meet you there. But I'm not coming with you. I'll see you at the museum. I could hear the relieved exhale on the other end of the line. He thought he'd won a small victory. He thought he still had a chance. Thank you, Alara. Thank you. You won't regret this. I'm sure I won't, I said and ended the call. The following evening I prepared for the gala as if for battle. I chose a gown of liquid mercury silk, a color that shifted and changed in the light, impossible to pin down. It was sleek, backless, and powerfully modern. I wore my hair down but straightened into a severe, glossy sheet. My jewelry was minimal, diamond studs and a single heavy platinum cuff on my wrist. I looked like the future, cold and brilliant. I arrived alone in a car sent by my father. The museum steps were a blaze of flashbulbs and shouted questions. I ignored them all, walking up the red carpet with a detached, regal grace. Inside, the party was in full swing, a cacophony of chatter, clinking glasses, and string music. The air smelled of champagne and expensive perfume. Heads turned as I entered. The whispers started immediately. I saw the calculations in people's eyes, the curiosity, the awe, the fear. I saw Lawrence and Beatrice Thorne across the room, surrounded by a few loyalists, their faces tight and strained. They looked like ghosts at the feast. Julian spotted me and hurried over, a too bright smile plastered on his face. He looked handsome in his tuxedo, but there was a feverish gleam in his eyes, a desperation he couldn't quite mask. Alara, you look stunning. He went to take my hand, but I subtly shifted my clutch bag, forcing him to abort the gesture. Julian, I acknowledged him with a slight nod. Can we talk? Somewhere private? The balcony. Of course. We moved through the crowd, the sea of people parting for us. We were the spectacle of the evening. On the deserted balcony, overlooking the sculpture garden, the false civility dropped from his face. What will it take, Alara? He demanded, his voice low and urgent. Name your price. What do you want to stop this? I leaned against the cold stone balustrade, looking out at the shadowy sculptures. I wanted a husband who respected me. I wanted a partner who was loyal. I wanted a life that wasn't a lie. You can't give me any of those things. So there is no price. This is about vengeance, he spat. You're enjoying this. I turned to look at him, the city lights glinting in my eyes. I am. Immensely. But it's more than that. It's about correction. You were a flaw in the system, Julian. A virus. And I'm the antivirus. His composure finally shattered. You cold, heartless bitch. Do you think you'll win? My father and I have contacts you can't imagine. We'll find a way to stop you. Contacts like Kenji Asano? I asked, my voice dropping to a silken whisper. The effect was instantaneous. All the color drained from his face. He took an involuntary step back, his eyes wide with sheer, unadulterated terror. It was the look of a man who had just felt the trapdoor open beneath his feet. What? Oh. I don't know what you're talking about. The second phone, Julian. The black one. The one you used to text K. Asano. The one you used to feed him our internal numbers during the Chin merger negotiations. I took a step toward him. Tell me, what was your cut? Was it worth it? Was it worth committing industrial espionage, breaching your fiduciary duty, committing a felony? All for what? A little extra spending money for your mistress. He was shaking his head, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. You have no proof. Don't I? I smiled, then a slow, chilling reveal. A frightened, pregnant woman sees and hears a great deal. And she's very motivated to secure her future. Especially when the father of her child has proven to be a criminal as well as a cad. The realization that Isabel had turned on him was the final, crushing blow. He looked utterly broken, his world collapsing inwards. He had lost the business war, he had lost his mistress, and now he was facing the very real possibility of prison. Elara, please, he whispered, his voice cracking. You can't. I can, I said softly. And I will. Enjoy the rest of your evening, Julian. I turned and walked back into the glittering party, leaving him alone on the dark balcony, a ruined man standing in the shadows. The noose was not just tight, it was around his neck. And I was holding the rope. The morning after the gala, the world exploded. Not with a slow financial bleed, but with a single seismic shockwave. My father and I had coordinated with the SEC and the Justice Department. At 9:01 a.m. as the markets opened, a joint press release landed like a bomb. It detailed the investigation into Julian Thorne for insider trading, securities fraud, and industrial espionage related to the Chin merger. The evidence, provided anonymously by a cooperating internal source, was compelling. Records of encrypted communications, financial transfers to a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands linked to Julian, and a sworn affidavit from a deeply remorseful Isabel Lauron, who was now safely housed in a secure location under witness protection. The story was the lead on every financial news channel, every business website, every major newspaper. Thorne heir indicted in shocking corporate espionage scandal. Vance Thorne partnership implodes. The fallout was instantaneous and catastrophic. Trading in all Thorne-associated entities was halted. The Vance Holdings Board, in an emergency session that lasted 7 minutes, voted unanimously to forcibly buy out the Thorne family's stake for a token amount of $1, citing the massive liability and reputational damage they had brought upon the company. It was a brutal, symbolic execution. I watched it all from my office, the television on mute, the frantic headlines scrolling silently across the screen. There was no triumphant cheer, no vindictive smile. There was only a profound, quiet stillness. This was the culmination of weeks of meticulous planning, of channeling a profound personal betrayal into a cold, corporate offensive. It was over. My phone rang. It was my father. It's done, he said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite place. Pride, yes, but also a trace of sorrow for the partnership he had once believed in. It's done, I echoed. The lawyers are drawing up the divorce papers. With the criminal case, Julian won't be able to contest a thing. You'll be free of him by the end of the week. Free. The word felt foreign. I hadn't felt free in years. I wasn't sure I even remembered what it felt like. An hour later, my assistant buzzed, her voice tense. Ms. Vance, Mr. Lawrence Thorne is here. He's insistent. And he doesn't have an appointment. Lawrence. The patriarch. The man who had always looked at me as a necessary accessory, a vessel. I had half expected this. Send him in. The man who walked into my office was a ghost of his former self. The booming voice, the puffed-up chest, the aura of invincibility, all were gone. He seemed to have aged a decade in a few weeks. His suit was rumpled, his eyes bloodshot and hollow. Elara, he said, his voice a broken whisper. Lawrence. Have a seat. He didn't. He stood before my desk, a supplicant before a throne. Why? He asked, the single word laden with a world of pain and confusion. Why go this far? We were family. We built this together. You built it on my father's back, I corrected him, my voice calm. And your son tried to steal it out from under him. And under me. You raised a viper, Lawrence. You taught him that ambition without integrity was a virtue. You taught him that the Vance name was something to be absorbed, erased. You never saw me as an heir. You saw me as a placeholder. He shook his head, a feeble denial. We could have worked this out. The baby, the boy. is irrelevant to the Vance legacy, I stated coldly. My legacy. That ends with me if I so choose. Or it continues through adoption. Or it passes to a chosen successor who has earned it. It will not be hijacked by your son's bastard, conceived in betrayal and raised in the shadow of a felon. The brutal finality of my words broke the last of his spirit. His shoulders slumped. He looked like a man who had lost everything because he had. Julian is facing 20 years in prison, he said, his voice cracking. His life is over. My company, my life's work, is gone. Are you satisfied now? I looked at him, this broken old man, and felt a distant pang of something that wasn't quite pity. It was more like the clinical assessment of a pathologist examining a terminal case. Revenge isn't about satisfaction, Lawrence, I said, standing up and walking to the window. I looked down at the city my father and I now controlled, utterly and completely. It's about balance. It's about restoring order. You and your son created an imbalance. You introduced chaos and betrayal into a carefully structured system. My actions weren't revenge in the emotional sense. They were a corrective measure. A necessity. I turned to face him. So, to answer your question, yes. It is complete. You have nothing. I have everything. The balance has been restored. He stared at me for a long moment, and in his eyes, I saw the dawning, horrifying realization that he had never known me at all. That the quiet, compliant woman he had shared family dinners with for years had been a phantom, and the real Elara Vance was this iron-willed queen who had just checkmated his entire dynasty. He turned without another word and shuffled out of my office, a defeated king leaving the field of battle. I was alone. The silence in the room was absolute. The headlines continued to scroll on the screen, but they felt distant, like echoes from another life. I had won. The thorns had fallen, and their fall had been my creation. I had expected to feel a surge of power, of euphoric victory. But instead I felt empty. The fire that had fueled me for weeks had burned down to cold ashes. The purpose that had given every moment sharp definition was gone. What now? The question hung in the silent, opulent office, more daunting than any boardroom battle or corporate takeover. I had dismantled the life I had. I had obliterated the future that had been planned for me. I was free, powerful, and utterly alone. But as I stood there in the echoing silence of my victory, I began to wonder if I had destroyed the prison, only to find myself the sole occupant of a vast, empty palace. The days that followed were a study in surreal quiet. The storm had passed, leaving a landscape scoured clean. The divorce was finalized with stunning speed, a mere formality given the circumstances. Julian, facing a mountain of criminal charges and his family's utter financial ruin, put up no fight. He was a ghost, his picture now permanently attached to headlines about scandal and disgrace. I moved out of the hotel and into a penthouse of my own choosing. A sleek, modern space in a new building, all clean lines and light. I filled it with art I loved, books I wanted to read, and no memories of a life that had been a lie. It was mine in a way the previous home had never been. The Vance Holdings empire was now consolidated, leaner, and entirely under my father's and my control. The board looked at me with a new respect, a touch of fear. I was no longer Elara Thorne, the wife. I was Elara Vance, the strategist, the victor. My father began talking about his 5-year retirement plan, a plan that ended with me in the CEO's chair. It was everything I had ostensibly fought for. Power, autonomy, respect. So why did the silence in my new home feel so loud? One afternoon, a week after the dust had settled, a small, discreet package was delivered to my office by courier. There was no return address. Inside, nestled in soft tissue paper, was a simple handmade ceramic bowl, glazed in a beautiful deep cobalt blue. It was sturdy, imperfect, and utterly charming. A small card was tucked beside it. Elara, I'm safe. Settled in a small town by the sea. It's quiet. I'm learning to make pottery. It's messy, but it's real. This is the first thing I made that didn't crack in the kiln. I thought you should have it. A token. Not of thanks, but of a new beginning. For both of us. I ran my fingers over the smooth, cool glaze of the bowl. Isabel. She had gotten her fresh start. She had chosen a simple, honest life over the gilded cage she'd almost been trapped in. She was building something new from the rubble just as I was. But her path felt organic, born of necessity and a desire for peace. Mine felt imposed. A fortress I had built out of the stones of my ruined marriage. That evening, instead of working late, I found myself walking through the city aimlessly. I passed the art museum, the scene of Julian's final humiliation. I felt nothing. I passed the restaurants we used to frequent. Nothing. The memories had been cauterized, the emotional connection severed. It was as if I was viewing someone else's life. I ended up in a part of the city I rarely visited, a neighborhood of small independent galleries and bustling cafes. The air smelled of coffee and roasting chestnuts. People laughed and talked on the sidewalks, their lives untouched by corporate espionage and billion-dollar takeovers. It felt alien and yet vibrantly alive. I stopped in front of a small gallery. The window display featured photographs, stark, beautiful black and white images of industrial landscapes. There was a power in them, a silent, gritty poetry that spoke of function and form. On a whim I walked in. A bell chimed softly. The gallery was quiet, white-walled, and serene. A man was standing on a ladder, adjusting the spotlight on a large photograph of a rusted bridge. "Be with you in a second," he said, his voice a warm, low baritone. I didn't answer, drawn to the photographs. They were extraordinary. They didn't just capture scenes. They captured a feeling of resilience, of beauty found in decay and strength. The man climbed down from the ladder and turned. He was tall, with the build of someone who used his hands, not just typed on a keyboard. He had dark, slightly unruly hair, kind eyes the color of weathered slate, and a smile that reached them easily. He wore jeans and a simple gray Henley, smudged with a bit of dust. "Can I help you?" he asked, wiping his hands on a cloth. "These are incredible," I said, gesturing to the walls. "The composition, the light. You have a remarkable eye." His smile widened. "Thank you. That means a lot. I'm Leo." He didn't offer a last name. It was refreshing. "Elara," I said. "Just Elara." For the first time in a long time it felt like enough. "So, Elara, what draws you to images of forgotten factories and crumbling piers?" he asked, leaning against the desk, his posture relaxed and open. I looked at the photograph of the bridge again. There's a story in them. A history. You can see what they were, and there's a beauty in what they've become. It's not a sad beauty. It's honest. He looked at me, his gaze thoughtful, as if really seeing me. "That's exactly it," he said, his voice softening. "That's what I'm trying to capture. The honesty of things. Most people just see rust and ruin." We talked. For an hour we talked about art, about light, about the soul of the city that existed far from the glass and steel towers where I ruled. He was passionate, intelligent, and completely unimpressed by the world of high finance. He didn't know who I was, and the freedom in that was intoxicating. He asked me what I did, and for the first time I hesitated. "I'm in a transition," I said, and it was the truth. He nodded as if that were the most natural state in the world. The best place to be. Everything is possible. When I finally left the gallery, the night air felt different. Lighter. I had given him my private number, and he had promised to text me when his next show was. It was a small, simple human connection, but it felt more significant than any boardroom victory. Back in my silent penthouse, I picked up the ceramic bowl Isabel had sent me. I placed it on my kitchen counter, a single, solid, beautifully imperfect object in my world of sleek perfection. It represented a truth. Power had not filled the void. They had been necessary steps, a raising of the old land. But now the land was clear. The future was a blank page. I looked out at the city lights, no longer as a ruler surveying her kingdom, but as a woman looking at a world of possibilities. The fall of the thorns had been my ultimate revenge. But it was also the foundation of my rebirth. The phoenix didn't rise from the ashes for vengeance. It rose for a new beginning. And mine was just beginning. The end.